In this place, those with a medical license are absolute. Everyone else is nothing but trash. But the patient's condition is. What? Are you, someone without a medical license, daring to talk back to me? I am a doctor. Just shut up and do as I say. Now move, you're in the way. With those words, Dr. Hawthorne shoved me, an endoscopy technician, hard on the shoulder. Dr. Hawthorne was a physician who blatantly looked down on nurses and technicians who didn't have medical licenses. I tried to convey a minor change in the patient's condition, but he wouldn't listen. When it comes to the patient, it shouldn't matter whether you're a doctor or a nurse. I wanted to say that, but instead, I bit my lip and held my tongue. Then, the condition of a patient Dr. Hawthorne had operated on suddenly took a turn for the worse. Dr. Hawthorne. The patient needs surgery immediately. Dr. Hawthorne. But Dr. Hawthorne, faced with the sudden crisis, froze, his breathing quick and shallow. His face was pale. I can't. There's no way I can perform this surgery. Dr. Hawthorne stood motionless, his face drained of color. But if we don't act, the patient will. The patient was in critical condition, and every second counted. Everyone was frantically trying to think of what to do without wasting a single moment. I made up my mind. I'll do it. My name is James. I work as an endoscopy technician at a specialized gastrointestinal hospital. When I was in high school, my mother was diagnosed with colon cancer and passed away in what felt like no time at all. She had raised me on her own, juggling work and household responsibilities, so she never had the time or resources to go to the hospital, let alone undergo tests. By the time the cancer was discovered, it was too late. The doctor had said that earlier detection might have made a difference. At first, I couldn't accept that my mother had cancer, and I felt like I was walking in darkness every day. However, my mother's doctor and the nurses frequently reached out to us with kind words. Welcome back, James. Oh, hi. Good afternoon. Visiting your mother every day must give her so much strength. All right, you're good to go. Yeah, he's grown up to be such a fine, dedicated young man, more than I deserve. Hearing that, I couldn't help but feel embarrassed as a teenager. And the doctor would say, "You've done so well up until now. And James too, you've worked so hard." He always offered words of encouragement and positivity. On another day, when I came to visit the hospital again, I happened to run into the doctor in the hallway, and he spoke to me. During our conversation, he said, "Just having someone by your side can bring comfort. The fact that you come here like this is also a part of your mother's treatment." Really? Am I actually being helpful? Absolutely. Without a doubt, you're helping. I can examine her condition or sometimes heal her through surgery, but I can never take your place. Even doctors and nurses can't compete with the comfort you bring to her. When I was feeling powerless and frustrated with myself, the words the doctor shared sank deeply into my heart. I was busy with school and part-time work. But the reason I kept coming to visit was that these conversations with the doctor were my only source of relief when the weight of my worries felt overwhelming. Thanks to the doctor and the nurses, I could always stay positive in front of my mother. "How are you feeling today, Mom?" "James, it's so good to see you." "I'm feeling pretty good today." Even though the side effects of the chemotherapy were obviously tough on her, and she always looked pale. She never failed to smile when I came to visit. "I'm sorry for getting sick like this, James. You should be out having fun with your friends instead of coming here all the time." "Don't say that. I'm here because I want to be. Besides, Grandma is around too, so you just need to focus on getting better." "Okay, I will. Thank you, James." My grandmother, my mother's mom, lived nearby and would sometimes help around the house or visit my mom in the hospital. Her presence was a great support for both my mom and me. Still, every time I saw my once vibrant mother now frail and wearing an apologetic expression, my chest tightened with pain. I don't want anyone else to go through the same suffering as my mom or me. Gradually, I began to feel a desire to become someone who could support patients like the doctor and nurses had. And I started considering a path in healthcare. So, alongside visiting my mom, I threw myself into studying rigorously. What should I strive for to save as many lives as possible? What does it truly mean to stand by a patient? Even while studying or working part-time, those thoughts constantly swirled in my mind. With relentless effort, I managed to pass the entrance exam for a prestigious medical school. And then, just before my high school graduation, my mother passed away peacefully, as if she were merely sleeping. Then 6 months later, my grandmother also passed, as if following my mother. Left alone in the world, I immersed myself in my studies at medical school, trying to fill the void. Constantly fighting off sleep, I tackled daily assignments, pulled all-nighters for reports, and worked part-time to support myself. My body and mind were stretched to their limits. But the regret I felt after losing my mother fueled my determination to keep going. I spent my student years buried in studies, overcame grueling clinical training, and finally took the first step toward my dream. I worked at various hospitals. At general hospitals, I got entangled in internal power politics. At small-town clinics, I faced the harsh realities of community healthcare. I often felt the weight of patients' suffering, sadness, and struggles, and more than once, I thought my spirit might break. I never wanted to feel this way again. There were countless times I thought about submitting my resignation. Still, I persevered, studying diligently during whatever free time I could find, and eventually became an endoscopy technician. Finally, I felt like I could practice the kind of healthcare I had always envisioned. By a stroke of luck, I landed a position at a specialized gastrointestinal hospital. James, I've finished checking the equipment. Please confirm it. Thank you. Then, could you double-check this as well? I handed a thick file of documents to the nurse. James, it's really reassuring to have you here. I'm counting on you again today. I'm honored to hear that. Though, it's a bit embarrassing. The cheerful banter with my colleagues eased the tension from earlier. Working at a hospital often keeps your nerves on edge, but the director, Dr. Kennedy, placed his full trust in my work. And my colleagues, both doctors and nurses, were great people, making it easy to do my job. From my experience, this environment was easily among the top 3 I'd ever worked in. Especially within my surgical team, we got along well, sharing jokes and discussing trending topics, creating a pleasant camaraderie. I deeply appreciated the joy of working in such a warm and friendly atmosphere. Then, one day, "Hey everyone, can I have your attention for a moment?" Even though we had several surgeries scheduled and were busy preparing, everyone stopped what they were doing and gathered around Dr. Kennedy. "Sorry to interrupt when you're so busy, but I wanted to introduce someone. Starting today, this doctor will be joining our team." The person introduced was a tall, slim man in a deep navy suit who looked about my age. He seemed a little nervous, but his sharp, arched brows radiated confidence. "This is Dr. Hawthorne. He has handled numerous surgeries at various hospitals and has become something of a sensation in the medical community. I personally invited him here because I believe he can make a significant contribution to this hospital. I hope all of you will work together with him to achieve even greater things." Dr. Kennedy then gestured for Dr. Hawthorne to introduce himself. Stepping forward, Dr. Hawthorne began speaking in an unusually clear and resonant voice. "Nice to meet you. I'm Dr. Hawthorne, as introduced. I've had extensive surgical experience, and I believe I can make meaningful contributions here as well." He puffed out his chest with pride. "Not to boast, but some of the cases I've handled have been featured in medical conferences. With me here, this hospital will be in excellent hands for years to come. Isn't that right, Dr. Kennedy?" Dr. Kennedy smiled broadly at his words. "That's very reassuring to hear. Anyway, I'll save the details for later. I look forward to working with all of you. His dazzlingly white teeth flashed as he smiled, leaving me with an inexplicable feeling of unease. While I clapped along with everyone else, it was clear from the atmosphere that many, like me, were a bit perplexed. If Dr. Kennedy placed that much trust in him, there was no doubt that Dr. Hawthorne was an exceptionally skilled physician. As I vaguely pondered such thoughts, I never imagined that this day would mark the beginning of a major shift in our environment. Hey! Stop dawdling and get everything ready quickly. But we're currently assisting with another surgery. There's no time for that. The patient is waiting. Dr. Hawthorne seemed to believe he was the most important person in the room, pushing forward with his own agenda without regard for others. Everyone around him was put off by his attitude. In this team, those with a medical license are absolute. The rest of you are nothing but trash. Your job is to ensure that my work runs smoothly at all times. He would openly look down on nurses and technicians who didn't have medical licenses. If anything went wrong, it was always their fault, even when it was clearly due to Dr. Hawthorne's own misunderstanding. Yet, he would never admit it and instead vent his frustration on them. Gradually, everyone started to avoid him. The nurses, in particular, became fearful of him, and even the other doctors distanced themselves, not wanting to get caught up in his drama. I kept a professional attitude, treating work as work, and maintained a calm demeanor. But perhaps that's what irked Dr. Hawthorne, as he began targeting me whenever an issue arose. Hey! When are you going to finalize this patient's surgery date? Actually, this patient had a traumatic experience during a previous procedure. So I'm trying to approach the situation carefully and ease their concerns as we discuss. Dr. Hawthorne glared sharply and snapped, "If you keep doing that, you'll never get to the surgery. And if that happens, we can't take in new patients. Just come up with some excuse and send them to another hospital." What? Are you saying we should just turn them away? Listen, a hospital can't function without processing as many cases as possible. But I suppose someone like you, without a medical license, wouldn't understand that world. Just so you know, Dr. Hawthorne said, pushing his glasses up sharply, this is a hospital for performing surgeries, not a place to keep people who don't need or can't undergo surgery. And aftercare is completely out of the question because with so many hospitals around these days, if we're even a little slow or hesitant, other hospitals will take our patients, so keep that firmly in mind. Finally, as always, he delivered his ultimatum. Dr. Kennedy has entrusted me with the future of this hospital. If you can't follow my orders, you're free to leave. It was nothing short of intimidation. It was true that, as Dr. Hawthorne said, a hospital couldn't sustain itself on patients requiring only aftercare or those who couldn't undergo surgery. However, a hospital isn't just about curing diseases. It's also about supporting those suffering from illness and their families. That's an equally important role. I decided to push back, just a little. That may be true, but isn't it also crucial to ease the fears of patients who are anxious about their illness or surgery? You, a mere endoscopy technician, are challenging me? A worthless nobody without a medical license. Dr. Hawthorne cut me off and shouted angrily, "If we followed your idealistic nonsense, this hospital would go under. You'd lose your job for your so-called justice. And countless patients waiting for surgery wouldn't survive. Is that what you want?" His sheer intensity left me unable to continue arguing. You just need to shut up and do as I say. Accept as many new patients as possible. Got it? With that, Dr. Hawthorne stormed out of the room, his white coat billowing behind him. My colleagues, who had been watching our exchange with concern, quietly returned to their work without saying a word to me. The once friendly and lively atmosphere had turned into something that felt like hell. Was my belief in patient care and compassion wrong all along? I couldn't shake the complex feelings swirling within me. Amid all this, a new patient, a man in his 60s named Kevin, came to the hospital. He complained of abdominal pain, and it was determined that an urgent examination was needed. However, I'm sorry, but I had a bad experience with an endoscopy before, and I'm worried. It's not that I don't trust you, but there's always the chance that something could go wrong. Kevin mentioned that he had experienced trouble during a previous endoscopy at another hospital. It was no surprise that the thought of undergoing another one made him uneasy. However, Dr. Hawthorne continued speaking without acknowledging Kevin's concerns. If you keep saying you're scared, nothing will get better. Please leave it to us. We'll perform an endoscopy tomorrow. If we find any polyps, we'll handle them right then and there. It's simple. Understood? Please proceed with the admission paperwork. Tomorrow? Isn't that a bit sudden? These things are best done quickly. I see. Dr. Hawthorne ignored Kevin's visibly anxious demeanor and methodically explained the pre-surgery precautions and forms to fill out. Without giving him much room to respond, he urged Kevin out of the room. Dr. Hawthorne, Kevin seemed very anxious. Are you sure he's okay? You know, it's just an endoscopy. You can get it done in no time if you just hurry up, he said, adjusting his glasses with a sharp motion before continuing. We're overwhelmed with patients waiting for surgery right now. There's no time to waste. Got it? Once this one's done, move on to the next patient. But shouldn't we monitor him closely for a while after the procedure? Just do as I say. Understood. The next day, it was finally Kevin's turn. As preparations were underway to administer the anesthesia, Kevin spoke up. Are you sure everything will be okay? His voice trembled, and his expression was filled with worry. You see, we've never been able to have children. It's just been me and my wife for so long. People had their opinions about it, but I've always felt happy in my own way. I just want to spend the rest of my days quietly with her. Our parents have already passed, so my wife has no one but me. I can't stop thinking about what would happen to her if something happened to me. I can't even sleep at night. Kevin poured out the feelings he must have been bottling up for a long time. Don't worry. The doctors here are highly skilled. Let's get you better so you can reassure your wife, okay? Thank you. Honestly, the doctor here seemed a bit intimidating, and I was worried. But having someone as kind as you around makes me feel much better. I feel embarrassed, a grown man like me, showing weakness. There's nothing embarrassing about that. Everyone feels anxious in situations like this. I crouched down to meet his gaze, speaking calmly and steadily. We'll do everything in our power to ensure your procedure goes smoothly. Your wife is counting on us and on you. Just as Kevin was about to speak, someone shouted, "Hey! What are you doing? Get him to the operating room, now." Kevin's expression once again clouded with worry. It's going to be fine. I'll be here with you, so please don't worry, I said with a reassuring smile, trying to put him at ease. As we entered the operating room and I took my position next to Dr. Hawthorne, he abruptly addressed me. You don't need to assist. Just stand there and keep quiet. But, without a medical license, you clearly don't agree with my methods. Having you around only irritates me. His words were unnecessarily harsh and pointed. All right, let's get started. Dr. Hawthorne began the procedure with practiced hands. However, whether it was due to haste or something else, his movements appeared somewhat rough. All I could do was watch silently from the side. Sweat. A nurse nervously stepped forward to wipe the sweat from Dr. Hawthorne's brow. This was a situation where even the smallest mistake could not be afforded. We continued monitoring the inside of the body on the screen. As expected, we were able to locate several polyps. Though they were sizable, removing them shouldn't have posed significant difficulty. All right. Moving on to the excision. Scalpel. Dr. Hawthorne issued commands swiftly and continued the procedure efficiently. However, partway through, his demeanor began to change noticeably. Anxiety started to creep into his expression, and the atmosphere in the room grew tense. The other staff began shifting uncomfortably. Damn it! What the hell is this? Are you okay? Shut up. If you're not a doctor, keep quiet. You're breaking my focus. Although the patient's condition remained stable, prolonging the procedure could increase the strain on his body. Eventually, it took about an hour to remove all the polyps. Post-surgery, Kevin seemed stable, and everything appeared to have gone well. Or so we thought. That night, as I prepared to take a short nap at my desk during my night shift, it happened. The emergency alarm blared throughout the room. Someone's condition had suddenly taken a turn for the worse. At that moment, my phone rang. Hello? It was a nurse. Kevin's condition had deteriorated unexpectedly. With a sinking feeling, I sprinted to Kevin's room. What happened? He was stable until this evening. According to the attending nurse, the call button in Kevin's room had gone off. When she rushed in, she found him clutching his abdomen in agony, groaning in pain. By the time Dr. Hawthorne arrived, Kevin was barely conscious. It seemed likely that something had gone wrong during the earlier excision. He was immediately transported to the operating room, and an emergency surgery began. Using the endoscope, we found a perforation at the excision site, with significant bleeding. If this wasn't addressed immediately, his life would be in jeopardy. Dr. Hawthorne. We need to operate right now. Dr. Hawthorne. But Dr. Hawthorne, faced with the grim reality, froze, his breathing shallow and rapid. His face turned pale. Why is this happening? His hands trembled as he backed away from the operating table where Kevin lay. It's not my fault. Hey! Did you hand me the wrong instrument earlier? He lashed out at the assisting nurse, yelling furiously. No! I handed you exactly what you requested. I witnessed that moment myself. There was no doubt about it. What are we supposed to do now? Is there no one else available? The other doctors are currently in surgery with other patients. I can't do it. There's no way I can handle this surgery. Dr. Hawthorne stood frozen, his face pale as a sheet. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic beeping of the monitors. Everyone looked at Dr. Hawthorne, their eyes silently pleading for him to take action. But he simply glared back, then leaned against the wall, unable to move. We couldn't afford to waste any more time. I made my decision. I'll do it. Everyone turned to me in unison. What? Are you serious? You don't even have a medical license. Don't worry, I do. What? Dr. Hawthorne, James used to be a highly skilled surgeon before becoming an endoscopy technician. So there's no need to worry. I worked with him at another hospital, so I know he's more than capable. The nurse said with a reassuring smile directed at me. Time was of the essence. I stepped out to change into surgical scrubs. Let's begin the emergency surgery. Scalpel. Though I felt a slight twinge of nervousness holding the scalpel after so long, my muscle memory kicked in. And I steadily proceeded with the operation. The surgery was a success. Thankfully, we acted quickly, and Kevin's condition remained stable throughout the procedure. Relief washed over me as I exhaled deeply. Dr. Hawthorne, however, looked visibly uncomfortable. The nurses and staff cast cold, disapproving glances in his direction. Unable to bear the weight of their stares, Dr. Hawthorne collapsed onto the floor. Looking closer, I could see his body trembling. I approached Dr. Hawthorne and spoke to him. Why don't we step out for a bit? It's been a while for me too, and I've worked up quite a sweat, I said, deliberately light-hearted to ease the tense atmosphere. But Dr. Hawthorne remained expressionless. His legs wobbled, and he could barely walk, so I put my arm around his shoulder and managed to guide him to a nearby chair. While buying coffee from the vending machine, I received a call from one of the nurses who had assisted during the surgery. I returned to Dr. Hawthorne to relay the nurse's message, handing him a can of coffee as I said, "The nurse earlier said Kevin's condition is stable, and the surgery was a success." That's. He seemed like he wanted to say he felt relieved, but the words wouldn't come out. We both popped open our coffee cans and took a long sip. It had been hours since either of us had taken any fluids. After a moment of silence, I finally spoke. "With your skill, Dr. Hawthorne, you could have handled that emergency surgery. What happened back there?" Dr. Hawthorne stared at the floor with a grim expression before speaking haltingly. "Something like that has never happened to me before." "You've never failed before, have you?" "No. I haven't." For the first time, I saw genuine dejection in Dr. Hawthorne's face. The arrogance he often wore seemed to crack, revealing a vulnerability beneath it, a kind of armor he had relied on. Until today, everything had been smooth. I believed that as long as everyone followed my lead, this hospital would thrive. That's what I held on to. But now, why did this happen? He covered his face with his left hand. "I understand the desire to stick to your principles. But what led you to adopt that mindset?" He didn't say anything. He hesitated, clearly debating whether to open up. But after a moment, as if something inside him had shifted, he began to share his thoughts, piece by piece. "My father was a doctor who ran a small clinic, a truly compassionate man who prioritized his patients above all else without caring about profits. Earning the trust and admiration of everyone, often joking with the nurses, a figure I was proud of as a child, though as I grew older, I began to question his way of doing things." His face grew more bitter, reflecting the weight of those memories. "Despite earning little income, my father was always rushing around, tirelessly busy, while my mother supported him by assisting with administrative tasks. Without uttering a single complaint, my mother supported him. Watching from the sidelines, I couldn't help feeling somewhat exasperated. I wondered why he kept doing things that only seemed to bring loss. I listened silently, not wanting to miss a word. As expected, the clinic's finances became increasingly strained. And not long after, my father collapsed. It was colon cancer. By the time it was discovered, it was already too late." Dr. Hawthorne's voice cracked, and the pain in his eyes revealed how deeply this loss had scarred him. The pain of losing a parent never truly goes away. And yet, after going through all that, why did you decide to become a doctor? "Because I didn't want to see more doctors like my father. My father let his compassion for others destroy not only his clinic but himself. When that happens, it all falls apart. A hospital is supposed to save lives. If you only cater to the patient's wishes without thinking about sustainability, a hospital can't survive. Don't you agree?" He posed the question to me, and I closed my eyes for a moment. The hum of the vending machine felt unusually sharp in the silence. "I also lost my mother to colon cancer." Dr. Hawthorne's face shifted to one of surprise. "But the doctors and nurses who cared for her were incredible. Thanks to them, both my mother and I were able to spend her final moments without regret. Losing her was devastating, but my heart, it was undoubtedly saved by your father." "What?" Dr. Hawthorne looked at me, stunned, unable to speak, his eyes fixed on mine. "When I first heard your name, I thought it couldn't be. But your last name is quite uncommon, so I did some research. I was shocked. What are the odds of something like this? Your mother was one of my father's patients?" When I learned my mother didn't have long to live, I was consumed by helplessness. All I could do was bring her fresh clothes and visit her every day. "But your father and the nurses didn't just care for her, they cared for my family too. Their kindness gave us incredible strength." Dr. Hawthorne listened quietly, absorbing every word. That's why I decided I wanted to become someone who could support those suffering from illness. When I achieved that dream and became a doctor, I was overjoyed. I thought I could finally be like your father, standing by people in their darkest times. Unknowingly, I had been chasing the example set by Dr. Hawthorne's father all along. From that point on, I devoted myself to supporting lives in my own way as a doctor, but over time, I began to feel that what I was doing was straying far from my original vision, and unable to continue practicing medicine without conviction. I decided to reset my career and pursue becoming an endoscopy technician. Straightening my previously leaning posture, I said, "There's always more to learn in this line of work." I let out a wry smile and gulped down the can of coffee that had long since turned lukewarm. So that's what happened. I didn't know. The tension that had stiffened Dr. Hawthorne's face began to soften little by little. "Dr. Hawthorne," I cleared my throat before continuing, "I don't think the convictions you've worked so hard for are wrong. The reality is, hospital management can't run on ideals alone. That's something I've come to understand through my own experiences. To save lives, there are times when we have to make compromises. Facing seemingly insurmountable obstacles, I've wrestled with that reality countless times. Keeping track of a patient's physical condition is essential. But beyond that, understanding their emotional state as thoroughly as their physical health may hold the key to truly saving lives." And also, Dr. Hawthorne remained silent, his head bowed. Patients are already vulnerable because of their illnesses. If we, as their caregivers, act cold or tense, it won't aid their recovery. When it comes to holding someone's life in our hands, there's no room for hierarchy. That's something. After a brief hesitation, I said, "That's something Dr. Hawthorne, as his son, surely understands better than anyone." Dr. Hawthorne looked startled and lifted his head. Tears were welling up in his eyes. It was clear he had been struggling too. Unknowingly, Dr. Hawthorne had been chasing after his father's legacy, grappling with his own inner conflicts all along. 2 weeks after the emergency surgery, Kevin was discharged, smiling and in good health. And then, "Everyone, today's patient is very nervous about their first surgery. While there are limits to what we can do, please do your best to accommodate their needs as much as possible." Yes. Standing tall and confidently leading the surgical team, Dr. Hawthorne no longer carried his former air of arrogance. Instead, his face was lit with smiles, and he seemed more lively and engaged than ever before. Dr. Hawthorne had undergone a complete transformation, apologizing to the nurses and staff for his past behavior. Realizing that a harmonious workplace needed a touch of casual conversation, he began actively communicating with the team. With the tension gone, the atmosphere felt more unified, and the team's sense of camaraderie seemed stronger than ever. This change made work much smoother. I felt that I, too, could face patients with a greater sense of calm and focus. Through this experience, I reaffirmed that my beliefs were not wrong. As Dr. Hawthorne said, a hospital can't run on compassion alone. However, the body and mind are deeply interconnected, and in moments of fear or hardship, people can truly entrust themselves to those who offer them comfort and support. In a field where lives are at stake, I realized how essential it is for the people involved to be trusted and respected by their peers so that, together, they can face any challenge head-on. Moving forward, I hope to continue working with my irreplaceable colleagues to support as many patients as possible.